Thank you so much, Tina, and thank you everyone for having me. I drew this image exactly a year ago, almost to the date. It's called Phases of the Heart. On either side is a full heart, but in between there is hurt, brokenness, bewilderment, absence, but eventually acceptance, healing, and then back to the whole. And put simply, this is the magic of the spectrum. It encompasses everything and shows that there would be no whole heart unless there is the so-called broken and failed pieces that are part of it. We often treat our hearts and our emotions like it's a machine. Backslide. We're either happy or we're sad. We're in love or we're heartbroken. But the truth is that life and our emotions are not black and white, and there's so much in between. It's this in-between space that we experience the richness of life, and it's a spectrum. So this is what I've dedicated the last 4 years of my life towards. Understanding these nuanced emotions and expressing it and sharing it in simple ways that make sense to people. 4 years ago, I took on the 100-Day Project, and it was purely out of an effort for me to understand myself better, to process emotions that were coming up for me, and to practice a little Instagram vulnerability. So that's what I did. I drew my emotions every day for 100 days and posted them regularly on Instagram. I made these simple monochromatic illustrations that seemed cute on the outside, but were disarmingly deep on the inside when you got closer to it. And they told stories of ambiguous loss. They asked questions of existential questions of identity and so many other things that are obscure. So much so that I called the project Obscure Emotions, because I really wanted to talk about things that we all universally feel and yet don't always have the adequate words to express. So clearly, after 100 days, the project didn't stop. It continued in many different forms. I participated in 2 art shows back in 2017. I self-published a book that Tina has. I created a small online advice column where people would send me their emotions and I would draw an image for them in response. I also have a deck of cards coming out later next month. But beyond all of this, what was truly valuable and what I really learned was the lessons that came with studying and exploring my own spectrum of emotions. And so there are 3 key takeaways I want to share with you all today. So number 1, learning to refine the ability to recognize the nuances of our emotion. So what does this mean? It means that life is not black and white and it's not 2-dimensional. A quick story. I drew this image when I felt this frustration that there wasn't the right words or images that describe the many shades of heartbreak I experience on a day-to-day basis. And heartbreak itself is such a lofty term, and it's too large to describe the small daily occurrences in which the heart might shrink or expand. Like a text that is never returned, a friendship that slowly drifts apart, the guilt that comes when you feel bad for having a perfect life. But on the spectrum of the heart, there is space for every emotion and every feeling. Nothing is wrong or bad, but rather part of the whole. And lesson number 2 is learning to hold space for our opposite emotions. It's okay to feel multiple things at once. You can see in the characters are all holding an opposite emotion together. They're holding that tension. And what's amazing is that the spectrum gives us permission to hold our contradictory and paradoxical truths together. And to quote Father Richard Rohr, a Franciscan teacher I greatly admire, he says, holding opposites is the key to maturity. So I drew this image at the beginning of COVID when asking, how are you, was way too loaded of a question. There was no one answer I could give. I was grieving the loss of normalcy, of my normal life being taken away. I was grieving the loss of so many other lives. And yet I was relieved that I was healthy and my family was healthy. I was so happy to be sheltered at home, and yet I was still anxious for the future. I felt that gratitude and grief were held side by side, but also my disappointments could be tinged with joy and opportunity. And so even though there's a lot happening here, what really helped me is understanding that I can give myself permission to be in this tension and hold these opposites together without judgment. There is space even for our contradictions. And this comes to the third lesson. What is most personal is most universal. I'll say it one more time. What is most personal is most universal. So what one person feels deeply is likely going to be felt by another person. And I'll just say that I live a lot of my life in that yellow circle. Probably 90% of the time, I am in my own world. But what I've learned time and time again through my own personal relationships is that connection happens where these two circles meet in the center. And that connection happens through vulnerability. So when I can show up and be as honest and real as possible, I give permission for someone else to do the same. And that is how we create a culture of greater empathy and greater compassion. And coming to this next slide, I want to leave you with just a very tangible takeaway. These 3 lessons have corresponding worksheets that are available for you to discover your own emotional spectrum. The Creative Mornings team will post the Dropbox link in the chat, and I just hope that it can be helpful for you in discovering that for yourself. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge that our emotions, that when we acknowledge our emotions on a wider spectrum, that is one of the greatest services that we can do for ourselves and for others. It acts as a tool for greater human connection, empathy, and understanding. And in today's COVID world, I can't imagine anything more important. So thank you everyone for being here with me today.